Hello. Sorry, Akash. I think I'm having some audio issues, so let me restart my headphones.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, folks.
Hello, yes, I can finally hear everybody. Let me start sharing my screen. Can everyone see the agenda list?
Yes.
Thanks for confirming. Yeah, let me pull up the pull request. The only one that's currently actionable is 1293. We had a little bit of discussion offline around how do we introduce the new CR and how do we have certificate store and key management provider enabled at the same time, but we haven't found a good solution yet. So I've added that to the agenda to discuss today. Akash, would you like to talk about it a bit so we have everyone have the context?
Sure. So again, this PR is going to be introducing the new key management provider resource that we had all agreed upon. And this resource will actually replace the existing cert store resource. So moving forward, we want to recommend to the user that they use the KMP, short for key management provider, instead of using cert store. The problem here is that we need to figure out a good way to introduce the KMP without breaking existing users. So existing users might be running a previous version of Ratify that doesn't install the key management provider by default, which would mean that you might get scenarios where the existing cert store on the cluster would be installed alongside a new key management provider resource. So functionally, they do essentially the same things. So KMP is a superset of the certificate store because KMP supports certificates and keys. So if you were to have both of them configured on the cluster at once, they are implemented independently. In fact, the certificate store was not touched at all. The plan is that we won't touch any of the user-facing or implementation behavior, and the KMP is going to be a completely separate implementation and separate user experience. So the only concern with having both of them on the cluster is one, when you refer to in your verifier, whether that's cosign or notation, specifically for notation, when you specify which certificates you want to use, you need to actually specify which certificate store resource you want to grab those certificates from. And currently, you provide the metadata name of the resource. Similarly, for a key management provider, you would do the same thing, and there wouldn't be a conflict between the cert store and the KMP if that name was different. If they have the same metadata name, then there's some logic we have to implement where we will have to decide, do we give deference to the certificate store that was already there? Do we give deference to the new resource? It gets a little bit convoluted there. The other concern is around guidance, right? We want to really encourage any new users to move to use the new resource out of the box, and not have to deal with potentially upgrading later down the line when we've already introduced this new resource. So those are the main concerns and issues here. So if we can discuss and agree upon a path forward, then hopefully that will resolve this PR. Any questions? Does that kind of make sense?
Thank you, Akash. This reminds me, we used to have the config policy, and then we introduced the regular policy, and only one could be used at once. Bin, can you add some details on when we introduced the regular policy? Did we use any feature flags? What did we do from a CR perspective? Did we deploy one, or did they exist at the same time?
Firstly, I feel it's a bit different because for the policy, it's just one resource. So for the regular policy and config policy, they are just two different configurations for the same resource. So we always apply the same CR with different values. And also I remember initially we have some feature flag so that we can switch between the regular and the config policy. And also because in my implementation, we can only select one of them. So there will be no any conflict between, if, for example, there's no way for users to deploy or use both the config policy and the regular policy. But for the KMP and third store, firstly, there are two different resources. So even though we have a feature flag, but if users deploy two, because we cannot avoid stop users to deploy two resources, in that case, we should have a way to prioritize which resource we want to use.
Thanks, Binbin, for the insight there. Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point that here you can have multiple cert store or multiple KMPs, which complicates things for sure. So I have kind of a proposed plan for this, and I responded to your comment in the PR. Susan, if you could just bring that up and we can discuss from there what we want to do.
Sure.
Yep, this one.
Yeah.
So basically what I'm proposing here is that we cannot introduce any sort of breaking changes prior to v2.0, especially when we're introducing a brand new resource. And so we need to at least continue supporting the certificate store. And the upgrade scenario is definitely very valid. So I think we need to prioritize keeping the existing certificate store support the exact same. Implementation-wise, it'll be the exact same. And in fact, if you have it on the cluster, then that is what takes precedence over any new feature that is added. So that's the first bullet point there. The implementation-wise, the one issue with having both the certificate store as well as the KMP is that if the cert store, it takes precedence over the KMP, and in the scenario that they both exist with the same name, you need to, it's going to defer to the certificate store that was already there. And I think the one way we can do this is we need to be very clear in the documentation that, hey, this is a new resource and this is what the behavior is going to look like. If you're going to have both cert store and the KMP, the cert store with the same name is going to be given preference. The second point here is that I think we should be updating our Helm chart to install the new resource instead of the certificate store. This is so that we, off the bat, any new users using Ratify 1.2 will immediately start using the new resource that's recommended. we will add logic into the new resources controller, so the KMP controller, to detect the existence of a certificate store that's already on the cluster. And we will log an error in the Ratify logs showing that we noticed a conflict. Both resources will still be operational, but there may be this extra behavior, and maybe we can even link to the documentation describing the behavior where if you have a cert store and a KMP, the cert store is going to take precedence. And then finally, in Ratify 2.0, that's when we'll actually get rid of the certificate store entirely. And the implementation, the support tests, all of it will get removed. And once that's done, we will remove the extra check logic in the KMP. And it'll just be assumed that if you're using Ratify 2.0, you're going to be using the new KMP resource moving forward. So I've added like a little bit of a sample log that's going to get output in the logs. It's going to show an error. And I've added a special error code key management conflict for it. I decided to not go down the route of updating the status field on the actual CRD for the KMP showing the error, primarily because there's not a good way to reconcile the resource and update the status once they have deleted the certificate store, because you would need to, the user would have to manually take some intervention before they see that error go away. And I think that might be a little bit too much to ask on the user initially. So that's why I've just left it as an error in the logs. We'll make it clear. We'll update our documentation for cert store to show that it's deprecated and point to the KMP. And KMP will also describe what is the preference order. And then in our release notes, we'll also add kind of a breaking or like at the top, a warning message saying this is the behavior. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I think it sounds good to me. All the considerations. My only concern is they didn't upgrade, and the customer will see a new CR for the key management provider type that they may not know. And they didn't really enable anything to add a new resource in the cluster. But I think with documentation, we should be able to address that.
Yeah, I definitely, that's a concern. I personally am in favor of let's move people forward.
Yeah.
Rather than, because if we don't do that and we're too cautious, people will not adopt it.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, another thing that we might consider is reaching out to different cloud providers and understand their timelines for for these types of resource applications, and see, hopefully we don't we're able to sort of accommodate a path for them as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and I think we need to sync up offline with the
Yeah.
parties there. Yeah.
Hi, E, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Yeah. Here are my thoughts. So, with this proposal, if I'm a user already installed Ratify, right? Then I upgrade to the new version, for example, 1.2. Then there is a new resource KMP. But I still can use the previous certificate store resource, right?
Yes.
That means any updates will be applied to the certificate store. And once I upgrade to 2.0, the certificate store will be deprecated. So what will be the impact for the certificate store resource that I already used, and whether there is a way to transform this resource to the new resource. I think for a new user, it's totally fine since 1.2 we in the document, and they will be aware that the KMP will be the resource that they needed to config for the certificate providers, and the certificate store will be deprecated. I think this is fine. This is just my source is meaning on the users that who will be upgrading to the 2.0, and at that time certificate store will be deprecated. However, I have all my configuration in the certificate store resource. How should I do that?
I think when we take the breaking change in Ratify v2.0, the customer would own changing from the certificate store to a key management provider. But ideally, if they're using the default Helm charts, the properties in the values file stay the same, and it should be a smooth transition if they're using the Helm chart we provide.
That means during the upgrade, user needed to configure the KMP resource, and then after the upgrade, the existing certificate store resource will be removed. Something like this.
Yeah, so maybe I can provide a little bit more clarity here. So most users, and our assumption here is that they would be using the Helm install command. That's what Susan is talking about. So they would be providing things like, okay, here's my Azure Key Vault URI, here's my tenant ID, here's my client ID, here's my certificate name that I want to configure as flags in the Helm chart. And those flags map to the same configuration that's in the key management provided resource. So when you do a Helm upgrade, it will generate a new key management provided resource on your cluster with whatever flags you've configured. And if you had an existing certificate store, if you had one already, then it's going to add it in addition to that. So now you're going to have two of them side by side. You're going to have one Azure Key Vault certificate provider. You'll have one Azure Key Vault KMP resource. Now, moving forward, since you have both of them, you should be updating the KMP if you need to go in and manually update anything. Of course, you could do a Helm upgrade and then change the flags, and that would again point to the KMP. It wouldn't point to the certificate store. From Helm point of view, moving forward, we're only going to be installing and updating the KMP resource.
That means a user need the actual actions, right? During upgrades, and they needed to learn the new parameters for the KMP resource and mapping it from the certificate store to the KMP, right?
Actually, no. So those values are unchanged. We do the mapping underneath to map to the new resource. So
okay,
the flags are the exact same. The install command is the exact same. It's just instead of under the hood a certificate store resource being created, it's now a KMP resource being created.
Okay, I think that in that case, if I have existing certificate store, if I do not want to change any configuration, then after upgrade, for example, to 1.2, then I don't need to do anything. And there will be something done under the behind the scene to create a equivalent KMP resource for the certificate store, right?
Yeah. So yes, we would, if you use the Helm upgrade command with the same flags that you've been using to install Ratify with your AKV provider, there's no actual user action. The only user action is that because now you have an existing certificate store in the cluster, you will notice that in the logs, there are some warning and error messages being thrown saying that, hey, you have both of these resources configured. please delete the certificate store. So the action on the user would be that they should delete the certificate store. It'll still work, but again, if you have a certificate store and a KMP resource with the same name, we will defer to the certificate store, not the new KMP resource.
So this is the one, for example, the 1.2 behavior, right?
Yes. That's just a sample error message that can be updated with added guidance, like please refer to this document to, address this error message, or we can even say, please delete the existing certificate store resource.
And any users updates will go to the KMP resource, right? We ask them to apply the changes to the KMP resource, right?
Yes.
Okay, so that means in 1.2, yeah, the configuration will be automatically created in KMP resource, and we will notify user there is a kind of conflict. You should switch to the KMP resource for any updates.
Yes, there is one scenario where there could be some problems where if the user, when they Helm upgrade to 1.2, and in the previous version of Ratify, they were running, let's say, an AKV provider with different setup, like different certificate or certificate version, because the resources now are not the same, when you upgrade, it's going to create a KMP resource with the same name as the existing certificate store, but the values are different, right? Because you've changed how you upgraded Ratify with the different value flags. Then because we give deference to certificate store, Ratify is going to use the existing certificate store configuration to pull from Azure Key Vault, right? So this is why it's important for the user to go in and delete the certificate store eventually, because you don't want to update the KMP resource thinking you're doing one thing, and because it's the same name as the certificate store, we're actually considering the certificate store instead.
Yeah, just going back to the partner scenarios, it'll be interesting to just understand what the guidance would be for for partners that have already adopted a previous, like that will be upgrading to the 1.2 plus releases when they have like these two type of certificate store resources in.
Yeah, sounds good. We can tag Xinghe on the PR. What do you think, Akash?
Yes, yeah, I'll tag him. I think we need to understand what their timeline is for updating.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think in 1.2, since we can map in the settings to KMP resource, maybe from user point of view, they can just start using it, right? For any updates, because we already migrated the existing settings. So any new settings values they want to add or update, they can follow the guide, just apply the KMP CRs, right? There's no need for the certificate store, and but we still prefer certificate store. So this could be a problem. I mean, the first item.
We could also reverse it, so we prefer the KMP over the certificate store. And we need to think through what that would mean in terms of backwards compatibility. Because Because if we prefer the KMP over the certificate store, that definitely helps with migrating the people over. And when you upgrade to use the new KMP within Ratify 1.2, you know for sure that that's the resource that is being considered by Ratify and not your existing certificate store.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few scenarios to think through, like the customers that's using the default Helm charts, and the customer who's using their custom charts and had applied certificate stores outside of the default installation. For those, they will need to create the new resource type themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why we said, okay,
Yeah.
we will, if you already have certificate store, we will continue supporting them.
Yeah, I think one thing maybe we can agree that in 2.0 we will break the changes, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
We will not support certificate store anymore. For 1.2 or 1.3, some users they are aware of these changes and they know the KMP resource will be automatically have the configurations as certificate store. They will just start using it and delete the certificate store. Some users will still keep using the certificate store, not change it, and any updates will be introduced in the certificate store. So in this case, I mean, during Helm upgrade, of course, we can do the migration automatically, right? So any later changes, because user apply the CR directly, it will not affect the KMP resource, right? So this is the only thing we need to consider the difference.
Yep.
How to handle that if some user still insistent in the certificate store resource. For this scenario, yeah, I don't think for this scenario we can do something. We needed to give this window for user, right? They can, for example, during this time you can still use it, but after this it will be deprecated and you should switch to the KMP. And in that case we cannot do the automatically migration. We can only ask a user to do it manually, right?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Akash.
No, I think these are valid concerns. One other idea is that I think the most problematic point we're having is point 1 here, right? Where if you have the same named resource, and particularly that's an issue with notation, right? The existing notation verifier specifies just the name of the resource, and that's where the conflict originates. One option is that for the cosine work we're doing, you use KMP. For the notation verifier, you use certstore, which is, it's not great, but it's like a hybrid solution if we are really concerned with backwards compatibility, not breaking anyone or breaking the existing experience.
So if they have the same name, is it feasible to give preference to KMP?
It is, but then what happens when, so user upgrades with Helm upgrade, we create a KMP resource configured identical to maybe how their existing cert store was. They want to continue using the cert store, they upgrade the cert, they change the cert store configuration manually, apply the new CR, the new cert store CR, and then they expect that to be used instead. But because it's got the same name as the KMP, we're still pointed to the KMP configuration. And vice versa, that's the same problem the other way, where if you support the certificate store,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what about if we introduce a feature flag and because KMP is new and it's in a default, just like less preferred, like preferred KMP false, but we update all our documentation for Ratify 1.2 to install Ratify with KMP preferred true. Is that a possibility?
I feel for the feature flag stuff. For example, if users want to like prefer the KMP over the search store, then they will enable the feature flag. Well, maybe while like installing or upgrading Helm. So I feel it's just the same as the user just delete the search store results. Is that correct? So if user delete the existing search store results, and then there will be only KMP results. So it's the same as using the feature flags. So because I don't want to add more feature flags, and in the future we also need to remove it in V2.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So I think giving preference to certificate store is being backwards compatible.
Yeah.
And by deleting certificate store, you're opting in to the new KMP.
Yes, that's right. Because I think since we already confirmed that we will only keep the KMP in V2, then in V1.2 or V1.3 is just a transition stage. We should not spend too much time on the compatibility stuff in these two versions. We can just keep the same behavior for the users they want to use search store, and we will also encourage new users to use the KMP with like from the doc, and I think it should be fine.
Okay. Yeah, then Akash, I think we're in agreement, like giving preference to search store is fine for 1.2. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, as I'm thinking at this again, it might be that we want to switch it. We might want to give preference to KMP first, because the problem we're going to have is that if the user thinks that when they do a Helm upgrade now, or they switch over to use the KMP, and they start editing manually or via the Helm chart the value fields of the KMP, but it has the same name as a search store that was like a straggler on the cluster from the previous deployment, like a previous version of Ratify, right? They will make updates to the KMP and it will not reflect anything because there's an existing search store with the same name that we're giving preference to.
Yeah, okay, I have a question. So, for example, if we have like a KMP resource and a search store resource with the same metadata name, and for example, if we have a feature flag and the users can switch between the search store and KMP, can we confirm that the behavior will be the same when the users switch between the search store and KMP? With like, for example, we have the same configurations in both resources.
Yes, we can confirm that the behavior will be the same if they both are configured the exact same, because functionally it's the same. The problem is if they configure one and it's different from the other, that's where the problem arises.
The challenge is we are deploying two of the CR. Like one for one
Yeah.
cert store and one KMP with the same configuration, then the user will get a little confused if they don't understand it, like which one they need to edit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I'm considering maybe a complicated way. So if we are if users are upgrading to the new version with KMP configuration, I'm thinking if we can, like, firstly we check if the metadata name of the new KMP same as the third store. If the same, then we apply the KMP and delete the original third store result.
We cannot delete
No.
the CR.
Yeah, I don't know what is that even allowed? Can you delete the because even if the names are the same, you don't know if the configurations line up, right?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So
But for the deleting, I think we can do it because when I was implementing the policy configure in one commit, I just add some deletion stuff, but I remove it later. But it should work if we add some deletion logic.
Yeah, but it breaks compatibility. Like the customer owns the CR and
Yes.
they should drive the action.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you explain the unique metadata name? What does this mean?
yeah,
Why user cannot delete?
Susan, do you think you could bring up like a sample
Yeah.
CR? We have it.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the scenario. If user in V1 they want to use the big store, they continue to use it. If they want to use KMP, they can configure KMP and delete the big store. Then we will know that the KMP is preferred. And in 2.0, we will switch the default to KMP. And
So
then
I'm
a
looking for
customer,
the CRDs.
and then the
Yep,
customer
so-
in the document, they know they will switch to KMP in 2.0. Yeah, so metadata name, okay, this one. So this one will be the, okay,
Actually,
verifier notation.
the cert store, maybe?
The cert store.
This one notation verifier, under that verifier, it will refer to the KMP or certificate store, right? The metadata for this one is cert store AKV. Do you mean that in KMP resource, it will be also cert store AKV?
So the Helm chart won't. It'll name it differently. However, there's always a scenario, right? They manage their own resource templates. That's where the issue is.
So you mean that user give the same name, right?
Yes. Well, yes. If they named where it says cert store AKV, if they named, let's say they just named this AKV, and created the KMP, but they named that AKV also. That's totally allowed. Two different resources, but the same metadata.name. Then that's when there's the conflict.
So maybe we can call it out. For example, I don't think that is a good way. So we can just list the scenarios. So in V1, if you want to use certificate store, then you can keep using it, right? Then you don't need to take care of about this KMP resource.
Yep.
I'm not sure whether we even need to migrate the data automatically, but this what we can talk about it later. But in V1, if you want to use the certificate store, you keep using it. But if you want to use KMP resource according to the document, we can call out that you cannot use the same name. And after the settings are migrated to KMP, you should delete the certificate store. Then we know that you will prefer KMP resource. For any new users, they just use KMP resource. We will in the document strongly recommend this. But if they want to choose the certificate store, that is the first scenario. Then they can use it. And starting from 2.0, we will not provide any support for certificate store. So this is also a signal for user. They need to switch to KMP as soon as they can.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
In
Okay.
this case, we can solve the conflict, right? We in the document called that if you want to choose KMP, you should not have the same name. You should delete the certificate store. Then we know the preference, right? By default, we prefer certificate store. If you use KMP, you need to delete certificate store. Then we know the preference. We can share this with Xinghe, and I know there is a time because currently for the error policy, it is not GA yet. Maybe it's better that Xinghe can consider to use it as soon as possible, so that when in the 2.0 they will not meet any issue for the upgrade. Because once those policy is GA'd, customer will not is reluctant to do any changes or migrations because it's stable for them. So it's better that from Xinghe's case they can do it early.
Yeah, do you know if there is UI for Azure policy to specify the key vault today, or mainly people provide the certificate through inline provider?
Currently in preview, all these configuration are through Ratify customer resource apply CI. Yeah. But in the GA, there will be some difference. User can use Azure Portal or Azure CLI to do the configuration without touching the Ratify customer resource.
Yeah, okay. So Akash, we're staying with the giving preference to certificate store?
Yeah, I think we'll just stick with that then.
Yeah, okay. So
I think maybe we can list what we just discussed, the different scenarios.
Yeah.
In V1, then it will be very clear for user for the actions.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm glad we had this discussion, so we then have the clear action on this PR. But that 40 minutes just went so fast. I did not realize.
Just one more thing that, as Luis mentioned before he dropped, we also needed to seek different providers for opinions.
So I'll do two things. I'll summarize what we're talking about on the PR, and then I'll reach out to Sinha about what his timeline is for upgrading and what he's thinking about this. So.
Yeah, thank you, Akash. Hopefully we'll have some time for
sorry,
next item. Go ahead.
One thing to close out. Susan, is there anything major blocking this PR?
Yeah, I understand. So I think there isn't anything. So if you want to, if it's just like which store we're giving preference to, that can be changed later if you prefer this PR to go in.
Yeah, this one is blocking the next one. You can't even really review the next one because there's just too many changes from this one.
Yeah, sounds good. Binbin, would you be able to take a look, or are you happy that I'll just take a quick look at the logic and sign off on that?
Yeah, I plan to take a look, but I will just be doing uncle stuff. So I'll try to find out some time to take a look.
Thanks, Binbin.
Thanks, Binbin. Whenever you have a bit of time.
Yeah, thank you.
Cool. Next one is certificate fetching. Is that an agenda E?
Yeah, actually, there was an issue created by Josh previously. Actually, if you remember that issue, I also tagged you in that issue because for some organizations, they will enable the auto rotation for certificates and the keys. Actually, both the scenarios are both valid for not-for project signatures and cosign public key scenarios. So in that case, the key, especially in AKB, the certificate and the key will have a new version. In most cases, for example, the certificate name will not change, the key name will not change, and also some certificate information, for example, subject distribution, distinguish name is not changes, so just the version is updated. However, as I know that currently Ratify only for the latest version at the time it configured, right? So if there is a new version in AKV, that means customer want this search or key to be rotated. However, Ratify is still using the old version.
Yep.
For verifying. Yeah.
Yeah. It is definitely something we need to address. At this point, probably we'll be adding this feature to the CAN-P SCR. And on the roadmap, is this one of the items listed for next release?
In the roadmap, I think it is in 1.3. Yeah, actually, the important part is that there will be some, I mean, since the, for example, for cosine case, since the key is rotated and the new images, I mean, will be signed with the new version. That means the verification will fail. And in some cases, user rotate the key is because some security concern. So they could also disable previous version. So for for Ratify point of view, it's better that we can figure out a way that we can automatically pull the latest one. And from configuration point of view, it is not good to always ask a user if you know when the key certificate will be rotate, you need to manually update. So that is not a good experience because user want to rotate the key and the certificate in AKV automatically. However, after rotate from the verification point of view, it is not an automation. It's still a manual way. So it's not a good experience for user. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely just a workaround, not the expected workflow. One clarification on disabled certificates. If the certificate expired or disabled, when we do invoke notation to validate the signature, what's the current behavior?
So in most cases, the certificate will be disabled after all the new certificate works. Then user disable previous one, maybe for some security reason, similar to the key scenarios. Because for the key, there's no for private key and public key, there is actually no expiry and no revocation like a certificate. So the only way that the user want to disable this key for verification, for example, it is compromised, they can do it in AKV by disable it.
Yes, but if Ratify is holding on to the certificate in our memory, and when we just pass it to notary for verification, what is a success or fail when the certificate is revoked?
For the revocation, it will fail. It's a different path. It will check with the CA, the OSCP, another provider to know that this certificate is revoked. So the verification will fail.
Okay.
The thing is that, the thing is that user has a new version if they update the root certificate, because it is the root certificate that we will use during verification and also the trust identity. So and the user merged all the chain in the AKV. So that's the scenario that user can use AKV to do the verification, is because the entire chain is merged. So so if the new version contains a different root certificate, then Ratify should be able to pull that certificate. Otherwise, the verification will fail.
Yeah. It's an item we've been tracking for a while. I will hope to. So it's not lined up for this release, the 1.2 release, but it's on the roadmap on 1.3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
1.3, yeah.
Should we bring up the roadmap to take a quick look? Any other discussions around the fetching?
No.
Sure. I'll bring up the sorry, it's one in the pull requests.
For the roadmap, it's if you didn't review it yet, please do that. So actually, in this roadmap, the first overview section I gives our mission and the strategy, and then I present the roadmap in different milestone to achieve our strategy. So this is the structure. So so today in today's meeting, I don't have anything specific for discussion, but I would like you to review the mission, the strategies and the scenarios and the milestones to see if those are aligned with your thoughts or any other considerations. You can comment it offline so that I can address the comments. And if anything, any major comments we need to have a meeting, we can maybe next week to discuss it.
Yeah, I think it looks great. I had a quick look. Like we talked about the Kubernetes scenario and also the CI/CD, and there is also somewhere we talked about like how we can integrate with the runtime, container runtime as well. I think the only thing that I saw in the like the milestones, is we need to break up the multi-tenancy. My understanding is we won't be releasing all the support for multi-tenancy. So some of them will spill into 1.3, but Binbin is working on breaking that up into smaller features.
Okay. Then we can later, Binbin, when you have time, you can add some comments here. But also, yeah, this target date, we should also consider our different cloud provider, their release. So this is the current plan, but for the multi-tenancy, if we need to break it into different work items, we will think which will be in 1.2, which will be in 1.3, or even 1.4. We can discuss that.
Yeah, overall looks great. Thank you for adding this documentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Akash, Binbin, any comments on the roadmap? And Juncheng?
I'm good with this document. I have taken a quick review and Mark has reviewed. But I have some other questions that got blocked recently, so I can do after this.
Yeah, I'll take a look.
I'll take a closer look as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and This document will be continuously maintained, and another purpose is that for the ratified donation, that right, we need to have this kind of document. It can also attract other contributors if they are interested into our visions, strategies, and they would like to contribute. So this is another purpose. And over time, we will maintain this, especially once we have a have a release, right? And we are starting to plan a new release, we can also update this roadmap accordingly. And yeah, that's the idea. So this document will not be a static document. It will be over time maintained. Yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. Just checking our agenda if we have anything else. Issue triage. Okay, we didn't get to that today, but we're at time. Are there any high priority issues that we need to triage from your side?
We have 3 minutes. Can you open the issues? We can take a quick look. The screen becomes small.
Yeah, is it better now?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some issue marked the charge. So
Is there any one that you
Yeah.
want to discuss today?
uh,
Since we only have probably time to discuss one.
yeah, in the roadmap, I also mentioned the error message improvements. I think this one we needed to also maybe work with Xinghe to see how we can improve it.
I see. So we don't have a
yeah,
tracking item for that yet?
it's 1321 improve error
1321.
messaging.
Got it.
This also in the roadmap is in 1.2 or 1.3. It's very near milestones. So we have the roadmap document, right? So once we are aligned with that, we can then come back to the issue list and update the milestone accordingly. And for this one, I think it is one, if it is not in 1.2, it will be in 1.3. I didn't remember clearly, but it is in a near milestone. Yeah.
Okay, I will review this issue and the detailed scenarios where we need to improve the message. And then probably if it's small, we may be able to fit it in this milestone. But if it involves more, we might push it to 1.3. But I will be able to comment on the issue.
Yeah. Okay. And for other issues, maybe we need to find another time to do the triage. Maybe next community meeting, we can prioritize this triage first. And in offline, if we think any issue we need to address urgently, we can anyway discuss it offline.
Yeah. Cool. Guess we're at time now. Thanks for joining, everyone. We'll continue next week.
Yeah. Thanks, student. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.